Silicon Valley is a region renowned as the hub for some of the most valuable tech companies in the world. And I'm sure that these companies have changed your life drastically over the last 20 years. But how did a small region that before high tech was only known as the largest producer of fruit manage to become home for world's largest corporations? Well, today, we're going to examine the story of the 8 traitors and how they created Silicon Valley and modern venture capital. Okay, so our story actually begins in 1956 with 8 employees that were working with a company called Shockley Semiconductor. These 8 employees are Julius Blank, Victor Greenwich, Eugene Kleiner, Jay Lass, Sheldon Roberts, John Horney, Gordon Moore, and Robert Noyce. The last 2 names may sound a bit familiar as they later become the co-founders of Intel. These 8 men were a group of young PhDs that were recruited by William Shockley himself, the founder of Shockley Semiconductor, who's also a Nobel Prize-winning physicist for his research in semiconductors, and he's a professor from Stanford University. Now, Shockley first started his company in Mountain View, California, close to his elderly mother who lived in Palo Alto. But this also meant that the company doesn't really attract employees because of its isolated location. At the time, the vast majority of semiconductor companies and semiconductor talents were mostly based on the East Coast. Shockley first attempted to hire some of his former colleagues from Bell Labs, the company he worked for before, but none of them wanted to move to the West Coast or wanted to work with him. So, Shockley posted ads in the New York Times, recruiting PhD graduates in physics and semiconductor experts. And due to his reputation as a Nobel Prize winner, he managed to employ some of the best and brightest graduates coming out of American engineering schools, including the 8 employees. Now, one of the reasons why Shockley built his own company rather than working for Bell Labs was that, unlike many other scientists at the time who favors germanium as the main material for semiconductors, Shockley believed that silicon is the far better material for building transistors. And he worked with his employees to replace the germanium-based transistor with a silicon-based transistor. And in the end, he's proven right, as the name of the largest tech hub in the world is called Silicon Valley, not Germanium Valley. Okay, so we know that William Shockley is a genius on semiconductors and an effective recruiter who employed brilliant talents for his company, but he also turned out to be one of the worst bosses you've ever seen. His biographer writes that he may have been the worst manager in the history of electronics. He's authoritative, erratic, abusive, micromanaging, lacks empathy, hard to please, and all-around paranoid. All of the employees' phone calls were recorded, and at one time, when his secretary received a small cut, he hired private investigators and also tried to send all 30 of his employees to get through a lie detector test, though all of them refused. The frustration of Shockley's employees then burst when he suddenly decided not to continue research on silicon-based semiconductors, an idea that he once liked and was favored by his employees. So in 1957, just 1 year after the company was founded, fed up with their boss's treatment of them and wanting to do things their own way, 8 employees from Shockley Semiconductor hatched a plan to escape the company. Eugene Kleiner, one of the 8 employees whom Shockley likes the most, or someone that he hates the least, asked Shockley's permissions to attend an exhibition in LA. When granted, he instead flew to New York and sent letters to various semiconductor companies and investment firms, with the plan of sticking as a group and network to find another company that the 8 of them could work for. The reason he had to go to New York was that it's hard to find bankers or semiconductor companies who operated on the West Coast, especially in 1957. The letter then came to the table of Arthur Rock, an investment banker for the firm Hayden Stones and Company. He evaluated the proposal and liked the idea of it, and he liked it because, on paper, these 8 employees should be destined for success. They are a young group aged from 26 to 33 years old. 6 of them are already PhDs in their young age, and the other 2 are each experts in electronics and semiconductors. 2 up-and-coming industries with lots of commercial promise, kind of like what we feel about machine learning and AI today. Not to mention, they are the former employees of William Shockley, a Nobel Prize winner who was considered as the god of semiconductors. So, what could possibly go wrong? If they were to open their startup today, hundreds of VC investors would throw away millions at them, begging them to take their money. So, like any modern venture capitalist would, Rock suggested them to open their own company. But the 8 employees responded with shock. Their first reaction was, "What do you mean starting our own company?" Partly because the concept of 8 young men with not much work experience starting a semiconductor business that needed millions in capital was just strange. The common culture back then was to find a company, work with them loyally for 30 years, then retire with a gold watch. The 8 employees wanted to find another company, not start their own. And even if we did start a company, they asked, how can we find $1 million? But Rock, somewhat dishonestly perhaps, promised them to get that $1 million for their funding. Thus, the 8 employees were convinced and they finally quit their jobs at Shockley Semiconductor. And from this day onwards, they became known as the 8 Traitors, although I don't think anyone would blame them for quitting. But while they had the favor of Arthur Rock, the investment banker, it wasn't easy to raise the money needed as venture capital as we know it today doesn't exist. Heck, in 1957, computers look like this, and people don't really know how this thing can be used in daily life apart from very niche academic purposes. Rock then got to work and he tried to find potential investors. Back then, there was no formal funding for tech companies, and many venture-style funding were mostly provided by wealthy families like the Rockefellers. So, Rock compiled a list of 35 businesses that maybe just could fund them. On his list, there are companies like Ford, Western Union, General Dynamics, Motorola, and many more. Surely, at least one would be willing to finance the venture in exchange for benefiting from the work of these 8 bright scientists. Rock pitched the idea to all 35 companies, but all of them turned down the offer. At the time, the finance world was just unwilling to take this kind of risk. But after seemingly reaching a dead end, Rock has another idea. He pitched the investment idea to a man called Sherman Fairchild. He's a person with inherited fortune, his father was a congressman and the first chairman of IBM, but more importantly, he's a science enthusiast. The idea was that he would invest $1 million just for fun, as he liked science, not because of the return on investment. The plan actually worked, and the 8 employees finally gained their seed capital of $1.38 million. Adjusted for inflation, that would be around $11 million. And they named their company Fairchild Semiconductor. Now, let's talk about the structure of the deal, because they made a kinda complex and uncommon structure at the time. Fairchild has a total of 1,325 shares. The 8 Traitors receive 100 shares each, totaling 800 shares. Hayden Stones and Company, the investment bank that Arthur Rock works under, received 225 shares, and the remaining 300 shares were held in reserve. In order to secure the loan, the 8 Traitors gave their voting rights to Sherman Fairchild, the science enthusiast, with an option to buy all of the 800 shares at a fixed price of $3 million. So, if the company went up in value of let's say $4 million, Fairchild could just buy all the shares that the 8 Traitors had and make them regular employees instead of a shareholder. Now, you might think that this is unfair, and in today's age, it is, because there's a cap on how much the founders of the company could make. Not one founder today will accept this kind of structure, but at the time, this was kind of unnecessary. In an era where people work at one company for 30 years, employee loyalty is almost guaranteed, as long as you don't have an absolutely bad boss like Shockley. So, there's no point in giving shares to any of the 8 Traitors. But Fairchild did it anyway, and from this point onwards, the 8 Traitors are not employees anymore. They're co-founders. You can say that this is the start of Silicon Valley culture of giving shares to employees to motivate them, something that we commonly see today, especially in a startup. Okay, so in the early days of Fairchild Semiconductor, they actually work in a garage, something that has become romanticized in Silicon Valley culture. That actually started with Fairchild. Then, after a couple of months, they move into a half-built building that don't even have electricity. But because they're scientists, they found a way around that. And it didn't take long at all for them to find success. Fairchild Semiconductor immediately had its first order, which was for 100 transistors to be sold to IBM at $150 a piece. They already turned a profit after just 6 months, and 2 years later, in 1959, Fairchild Semiconductor was taking in orders worth around $6.5 million. Fairchild also created the first integrated circuit embedded in a silicon chip that was able to be produced en masse. That year, in 1959, Fairchild exercised the option to buy all of the shares of the 8 co-founders for $3 million. The company was probably worth around $100 million already, so Sherman Fairchild went with a cool $97 million in profit, in an investment that was supposedly for fun. Now, the history of Fairchild and the 8 Traitors is influential because not only that they put the silicon into Silicon Valley, but they also provided a breeding ground for tech entrepreneurs and built the culture of innovation there. This is the start of Silicon Valley being the center of tech startups, and many firms that still exist today have their origin traced back to Fairchild. As I have already said before, Moore and Noyce later co-founded Intel. Roberts and Horney co-founded Amelco, which was later sold to Teledyne. Kleiner founded the venture capital firm KPCB, today is known as Kleiner Perkins, and one of Fairfield's earliest employees, Don Valentine, founded Sequoia Capital, which had a hand in providing seed capital for companies like Apple, Cisco, Oracle, Google, and YouTube, among many others. It is estimated that 92 companies trace their roots back to the founders and employees of Fairchild Semiconductor. Now, Arthur Rock, the investment banker who helped the 8 Traitors to get their funding, he got a big bonus from his firm thanks to him getting his company the shares of Fairchild, which the company profited millions from it. And in 1962, he founded Davis and Rock, regarded as the first modern venture capital firm in history. Consider this quote from Rock himself. Most fellows were approaching electronic stocks the wrong way. They wanted to know a company's revenue and earnings this year. That's crazy. The industry is in its infancy. Knowing where past earning or present ones are coming from is no help. This is the approach modern venture capitalists take as they nurture a company since its infancy. And once a company has enough sales or profitability, they can sell the business to another corporation with 5 to 10x returns. I am not sure whether it was Rock who first founded this approach of investing, but he is the one who popularized it, and he helped make venture capital as we know it today. Now, if you want another great but this time a tragic story, watch this video about the Chinese P2P lending scam. This is Doverhill, and see you next time.